Through disinformation and propaganda in film and television, there are United States government agencies that influence how the public perceives the CIA, FBI, etc., and how we have seen them throughout history. Hello, my name is Taylor Grace Davis, and this is my senior capstone on cinematic manipulation and disinformation, propaganda, and the U.S. government's role in Hollywood. The earliest example of government influence in film can be witnessed when seeing the 1915 film The Birth of a Nation. This film captures a fear-mongering narrative against blacks in America, and it was presented to a white audience to evoke fear against black people. The picture on the screen is a screenshot from the film, and it shows the support of members from the Ku Klux Klan, and they're depicted as the good guys as they save a white woman from a, quote, dangerous black man. The actor who portrays the black man is playing this role with an animalistic nature and seemingly without control. This is a prime example of propaganda against African Americans prior to the Civil Rights Movement. Pierce Redmond highlights in his academic journal the historical roots of the CIA through Hollywood propaganda, that the earliest evidence of government-involved media can be found when analyzing files that have been available to the public through the Freedom of Information Acts. Redmond boldly claims that the CIA quietly supported the Birth of a Nation film and emphasizes its long-distance relationship between Hollywood production companies and United States government agencies. At the time, the United States Department of Defense didn't have an obvious claim as to why they were involved in the support and production of this racist propaganda, but given the era of the film's release, it can only be assumed that the Department of Defense agreed with the content that it was supporting. Who knows why the DoD chose to support such a blatantly racist film? Perhaps it was for the chance to get involved with the Hollywood elites, because after all, it's common human desire to long for fame and fortune. Pierce states that it's an incestuous relationship between the U.S. military and its agencies as Hollywood began to become involved with, of course, The Birth of a Nation, and we will see further on the films that they were involved with in our history. Seemingly, this began to set a precedent and a foundation for the working partnership between the U.S. government and Hollywood today. So moving into World War II, there is a type of militarized propaganda that we begin to see. It's something that has spewed between the alliance that's formed between the U.S. government and Hollywood. And in the early 1940s, there was a man named Bob Cary Broughton, and he left his job at Disney to join the Army and work for the Office of Strategic Services, which has now again since been renamed to be the Central Intelligence Agency known as the CIA. Broughton's resume in Hollywood features classics like Bambi and Mary Poppins. So while he was on active duty during World War II, he filmed content for the war and drafted a documentary to highlight the bloodshed and the warfare. You can see under the caption for World War II that there's a screenshot from Broughton's documentary titled The Battle of Midway, which went on to earn him an Academy Award in 1943. Transitioning over as years passed to the Cold War, the fear subject matter switched from the Japanese to focus more on the Russians, and so did the plot lines and narratives that were featured in films that the CIA or other government agencies were involved in. For example, we have the film Animal Farm that was used by the CIA during the Cold War to influence the American citizens to support another battle of blood and worship, this time against the Russians. Now, Cold War historian Tony Shaw discovered in archived data that the CIA secretly purchased the film rights to Animal Farm, and subsequently they turned this story into a propaganda project, and they revised the ending of the film so that the quote pigs, who in this film represented communist masters, are overthrown by other animals on the farm. And Tony Shaw states that this rescripting was intended by the CIA to act as some sort of symbol of inspiration for revolution. The main goal of the connection between the CIA and Hollywood is that they want to control how the media portrays them, as well as how the public perceives them. So there are 5 filters used to depict the CIA in film and television. In films or television shows, you've seen the CIA as an assassin out to protect something or someone through a cool secret spy way with strategies. You've also, though, witnessed agents who have gone rogue and rogue operatives who are connected with the enemy in pursuit of their own agenda. Other times, you see the CIA portrayed as being unable to care for their own agents, especially because the mission always seems to come over the lives of others. There are times where the CIA agents lack empathy, and they're almost in a way willing to do whatever it takes for the sake of the mission. They lack empathy, they often are morally bankrupt. And then, in a stark contrast, we have instances where the CIA is portrayed as a buffoon. You see this commonly in the hit TV show MASH in the 70s. And you'll notice on the next page, we'll talk more about the incline between the 1960s up until the 2000s as far as the influence and presence of the CIA in Hollywood. Author Tricia Jenkins describes in her book, The CIA in Hollywood, the gradual increase beginning in the 1960s up until the 2000s era of CIA and its officers being featured in film and television series. In the 1960s, we had 5 projects release, such as Goldfinger in 1964 and Thunderball in 1965. Moving on to a gradual increase in the 70s, we have 3 Days of Condor in 1975, and then MASH, the television show I previously mentioned, where there's a little bit more of a comedic atmosphere surrounding the CIA and its officers. But ultimately, that ended in 1983. As we move on, we have films like The Soldier in 1982 and License to Kill in 1989, again with a gradual increase going into the 90s with films like The Hunt for Red October in 1990 and JFK with Kevin Costner in 1991. Up until the 2000s era, we see a substantial increase to 44 films having representation from the CIA or its officers, with films like Taken and Salt, and as well as shows like American Dad. So it's hard to deny that there's been a gradual and then substantial increase towards the 2000s era, nearly doubling since the 1990s. So it's interesting to take this into consideration. Retired Army veteran Chase Brandon went on to become the Hollywood liaison for the CIA in 1996, when the increase in productions featuring the CIA grew rapidly. Prior to 1996, in the 80s and 70s, there's a slight presence, as we've just witnessed in the graph. This is where we see most of the content that portrays the CIA with that buffoonish filter, like in the show MASH. It took us a long time to support projects that portray us in the light we want to be seen in, us meaning the CIA. It's clear that the government has had a working relationship with production companies in Hollywood for over 100 years. This is made known through the research done and conducted through released archived files that highlight the Department of Defense's hushed support of the Birth of a Nation film that was released in 1915. A key component to my research is the work conducted by Tricia Jenkins, as she highlights this gradual incline in government presence in Hollywood beginning strongly in the 1960s. While it's easy to consider that the CIA's influence is just a part of history, the question I encourage you all to think and ponder on is, what's preventing them from continuing to control how the public views them through disinformation, misinformation, and propaganda in our hometown cinemas? Thank you for watching, and I'd love to answer any questions that you might have.